Okay, good morning again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office for another of our webinar in this series, Know Your Collective Management Organization. We're indeed excited because this is the final webinar in this series, speaking with the Collective Management Organization. I am Chantal English. I am the Copyright and Related Rights Manager here at the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office. And this morning we have a special guest, the person of Miss Carol Newman, and she is the General Manager at Jam Copy. Good morning, Miss Newman. How are you today? Miss Newman, are you hearing me?
Okay, I now realize I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Chantal. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me at your Know Your CMO webinar series. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, awesome. So we're here this morning, audience, to have a nice little conversation with Miss Newman. So, Ms. Newman, we're looking at collective management organization. There may be persons online who don't know what a collective management organization is. So, my first question to you is, what is a collective management organization?
Well, am I supposed to be on camera? I'm not.
Yes, I would love if you're on camera.
Are you seeing me? What do I?
At the extreme top, there is the icon right beside the microphone at the top that shows the video. So, if you go to the top where you're seeing on air,
I see record. I see on air. I see.
right. So where the microphone is, there is a icon that represents a camera and one that looks like a computer screen. Right.
Mine is at another place. I don't know if you're seeing.
Okay, awesome. I'm seeing you now. Great.
Because it's not where yours is.
That's fine. All right. So we're talking about CMOs this morning. So there may be persons online who don't know what a CMO is. So the first question I want to ask you this morning to start off the conversation is, what is a collective management organization?
Okay, so a collective management organization is, just as the word suggests, it relates to a collective approach to managing your copyright. So it is basically a mechanism which has been set up by rights holders that they can come together and they authorize this entity to act on their behalf to give permissions for using their work. And that is where the collective comes in. So it's the group of rights holders coming together and mandating the organization, which they have set up, to manage the rights on their behalf.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And for persons who don't know, in Jamaica, we have JAMS, we have JCAP, we have Jam Copy. And today we're speaking with Miss Carol Newman from Jam Copy. So, Miss Newman, tell us, what does Jam Copy mean for persons online who may not know?
So Jam Copy is really the short name, and it's actually a registered trademark. So it is the short name for Jam Copy, for the Jamaican Copyright Licensing Agency. Persons tend to drop off the N of the Jamaica and say Jamaica Copyright Licensing Agency, but it's actually the Jamaican Copyright Licensing Agency.
Okay,
So
awesome.
short name.
Thanks for pointing that out. So tell us a little bit about the history of Jam Copy. You could go into the formation and also the role and the function of Jam Copy.
Well, Jam Copy, the conversations around setting up this particular organization dates back to somewhere around 1995, 1996, thereabouts. Initial conversation started. There was actually a task force that was set up out of the office of the Prime Minister back then. And it consisted of various persons in the what we now refer to as the creative industries. It was a collective group of both rights holders in music as well as in publishing. And this idea was mooted about setting up collective agencies. You've spoken with JAMS already, I mean, with JCAP already, so you've gotten a part of the history from them. That it was looking at one agency and the feasibility of just having a one-stop shop for everybody. And those were the kind of conversations that took place. And then it was decided that there would have been two separate organizations. The music was basically being managed by the PRS out of England at the time.
Right.
And so JCAP would have taken this agency, which would later become JCAP, would have taken over those operations. And there was nothing for literature on the publishing side. And so an agency would have been established to deal with the publishing side. So that task force carried on its work for a number of years, like I said, out of the regional office. At the time, there was no JIPO, there was just a copyright unit, and they were part of those conversations. And then later on, the conversation, as I said, took the direction of having two entities at the time. And out of that, a publishing task force was set up. And
Okay.
out of that came Jam Copy. Jam Copy was incorporated in 1998,
Yes.
and we started operations in May, full operations in May of 1999.
Okay.
And yeah, the doors have been open since, thank God. And
Yes.
we continue to, there have been many challenges along the way, but we have pressed on, and we're still here today. So Jam Copy is a type of CMO. So there are the various types of CMOs. So different rights holders for different rights come
Right.
together and form different kinds of CMOs. And these different kinds of CMOs have further names. It can get all very confusing. But in the publishing realm, we refer to the CMO that manages rights in literature, literary works. We call them an RRO, which is a reproduction rights organization. And so Jam Copy is an RRO, which is a type of CMO.
Right.
And the reproduction rights essentially comes from what it is that we are mandated to do. We are mandated to manage the reproduction rights that rights holders have, which is one right in the whole bundle of rights given by copyright. And
Right.
that reproduction right, not always saying not to be confused with the reproductive right that person earlier on. So it's reproduction as in copying, and for all purposes, a copy is a copy is a copy. It doesn't matter what form that copy takes. It can be photocopying, as it was when we started out. The conversations were around photocopying, as you can imagine,
Okay.
25 years ago, the conversation was about photocopying. Over time, that conversation expanded to include all forms of copy. And our Copyright Act here in Jamaica, the Copyright Act 2015, amended Copyright Act
Okay.
2015, took that into account. And I mean, that Copyright Act in the region is one of the forward thinking, that aspect of it, because our act is the one in the region that defines copy as broadly to include digital copy. So it includes photocopy, it includes scanning, it includes a PDF, making a PDF, the process of making a PDF from text. It includes copying and storing, putting in database. So it's any form of copying. Back in the day, we used to say, when talking about photocopying, that it was noted that we were accustomed, because of course back then we weren't accustomed to paying for copyright. So we used to make the argument that when we go to a photocopying machine with a textbook, for example, we think about the paper, we think about the machine not have any ink, and we pray that GPS doesn't disconnect the light, so we have electricity to run the machine. So we thought about those three things. We
Right.
thought about the paper, we thought about the ink, and we thought about the fact that we need to have current to be able for the machine to work. But we never even though we were going to make a copy of,
Mhm.
we never gave that second thought as to who write it and what should happen in that regard. So that was never.
Mhm.
And I used to say that it is important for us to take that into consideration, because really and truly, sometimes it doesn't really matter what the copy comes out, whether it's white paper or pink paper or blue paper or plastic or whatever. What you really want is the information. What you really want is the content. And it was ironic that we never paid much attention to the source of that content, and what went into providing us with that content, and who ought to be remunerated for the content. And so with the entering of Jam Copy on the scene, we began to have those conversations that rights do belong to the creators. The rights give them the exclusive rights to use the works, or to say how their works can be exploited. And this agency, Jam Copy, in was being set up to make it easy for users to get that permission that they need to get in order to use the work in certain ways. And so when you think about it, in an educational setting where a wide range of materials are used, and you want, as you as a lecturer want to do the right thing, so you want to be able to find the rights holder and get the necessary permission, but you don't know where to start. You have a text in your hand and it says it's published in Nigeria, and you have the name of the author. How do you even begin to navigate to get the permission that you need? And even if you end up on the doorstep, figuratively, of the author or the publisher, how do you know how much that what they're asking you for to pay is a reasonable amount? And so those are some of the ways that Jam Copy helps. So Jam Copy comes into the picture. It's the one place that you go to if you need permission to use printed materials. If you want to use text and images, and you come to this place and you're able to get that permission one place. Jam Copy is a member of the International Federation of Reproduction Rights Organizations, IFRO, and through that network, which is a federation of other RROs throughout the world, and not only RROs but other rights holder organizations. So like the International Publishers Association, International Authors Forum, various national author societies, newspaper licensing, and so on. So it's an organization with some almost 200 members having that are involved with text and images. And so through that network, Jam Copy enters into bilateral arrangements with organizations in other countries. And through those arrangements, Jam Copy then gives permission in Jamaica through licensing, um, to be able to use those works here in Jamaica. And similarly, those countries manage Jamaican authors and publishers' rights in those countries. So back to the example of the lecturer who wants to use this material out of Nigeria. They don't need to worry themselves about trying to find the author or the publisher, or who owns the rights now. They would come to Jam Copy and say, we would like to get permission to use this material in this particular way. Jam Copy confirms that this use that they want to make of the book falls within our remit, or if it doesn't fall within our remit, it's not too far outside of it, so we can probably help you because of our network. And then we will reach out to that publisher in Nigeria to get the permission for you in Jamaica. That's how it works, conceptually. But in theory, what happens is that when we sign all of these arrangements, all the works of those countries automatically forms part of Jam Copy's repertoire of works. It forms part of the group of works, if you will, that Jam Copy would then manage here in Jamaica. And so when we give a license, for example, to an education institution, and we can use, say, UTech as an example. UTech has a license. So when we give that license to, say, UTech, UTech is then able to make use within the scope of the license of all the works which are in Jam Copy's repertoire, including that piece of work out of Nigeria. So they don't need to come to us every time they need a piece of work. Can I copy this? Can I copy from this work? Can I copy from that work? Having the blanket license enables them to avail themselves of this wide repertoire of works within the ambit, within the scope of the license. And then we collect the license fees, and we pay back a portion of that. Of course, a portion of that is retained for administrative purposes, and then the balance, some of that is paid back out to the rights holders whose works have been used. So that is, in essence, is what Jam Copy is
Yes.
and what Jam Copy does.
Thank you for that very detailed overview. I'm sure everyone online now knows a lot more about Jam Cafe. So
I hope so.
You mentioned UTech. So who else needs a Jam Copy license? I hear you.
Well, I'm happy to say, I'm always proud to say this, both locally and abroad, that the Jamaican government was the first licensee, the first entity that recognized, acknowledged the need for a jam copy license. And so back in 2001, the government of Jamaica um, entered into a licensing agreement with Jam Copy for the copying that takes place in the public space, in the public sector, in ministries, agencies, and departments. Um, so the license covers the copying done in the ordinary course of work in ministries and departments. And then the second group that we licensed were the tertiary sector. So currently, our teachers' colleges, community colleges, our local universities all have licenses. Um, some private institutions also have licenses. Um, One of the very first ones was the College of Insurance. They were like one of the very first private entities. So big up to the College of Insurance. They were one of the very first private institutions that recognized the need for the license and took out the license. Um, Places like the Bible colleges, the Jamaica teachers, the Jamaica Theological Seminary. Those were also among the first group of private run education institutions. So big up to JTS and CGSD. They were among the first group as well to take out a license. Outside of the tertiary sector, for the most part, is covered. Um, the government of Jamaica for agencies and institutions, agencies and departments was covered. I should say that that license back in 2001 with the government did not include education institutions, which is why we had to license the teachers' colleges and community colleges and so on, because they were not part of that initial agreement. It was just for the work done in the ministries and agencies and departments. So outside of education, tertiary, we license. Basically, we ought to be licensing anybody and everybody who makes copies of text and image based materials and distribute the materials. So the licensing is for the use and the reuse of materials, acknowledging, of course, that there are some exceptions for reviewing the news and that excerpting and so on. But when it comes to making copies of substantial portions of materials and distributing those materials, that's a whole different ballgame. And so, businesses, for example, who make copies of materials and distribute it to its staff, its clients, um, that's another sector which ought to be licensed. We haven't gotten there yet, but we shall. And that's another sector. So that sector has not yet been licensed by Jam Copy. and remains the sector as the next frontier. But recently, as you have seen in the news, um, we signed a license with the Ministry of Education to cover primary and secondary level public schools. That license negotiation went on for as long as Jam Copy has been around. But thankfully, and thanks to Minister Favour Williams for stepping up and acknowledging that this is something that ought to be done, and who took steps to have it done very quickly. So the schools, so education for the most part is covered. That agreement did not include independent schools. That's a conversation we'll need to have with independent schools. But in terms of public education, that is essentially covered. And then we move next to businesses and corporations.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what kind of license does John Copy provide?
We provide two kinds of licenses. So we provide the most popular one, the common one, the easiest one, is what we call a blanket license or a comprehensive license. We tend to say blanket license more often than we say comprehensive license. But it's a blanket license, and as the name suggests, it's really blanketing everybody. It covers all the works that is in Jam Copy's repertoire. So that's a license that you get. It's usually for a term of 3 years and renewable after that. And the license, if you have a blanket license, then you are able to copy freely within the scope of the license from any of the materials in Jam Copy's repertoire. So you don't need to keep coming back to us because you want something. You'd only come back to us for some specific reason. So, like for example, if the if the library has one copy of a book and it's now tattered and torn and it's wearing out, we will allow you to make a copy of the entire material, the entire book. And but you need specific permission from us to do that, because the license does not allow you to make a copy of the entire publication. It's not intended to replace the publishing, the purchasing. That it's not intended to replace the purchasing of books, for example. The license is really in recognition of the need that you may only need a small portion of a textbook. So you may only need one chapter of a book. And so, in recognition of that, you're allowed to copy that one chapter. But if it is that you need 5 chapters out of a 10 chapter book, then please kindly go buy the book and contribute to copyright publishing development in the country. The other type of license is the transactional license, which is like it's a one use. So it's a license for a specific purpose for a specific period of time. And a very good example of that is the Jamaica Library Service. Big up JLS. The Jamaica Library Service, for the last several years, takes a Jam Copy transactional license every year for its national reading competition. And so that license just relates to the national reading competition, and they get a new license every year. And that license only will speak to the particular books that they are using for the reading competition that year. So that's a good example of a transactional license.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Next question. Take us through the process of obtaining a Jam Copy license. So you told us about the type of license. So tell us about the process now. So I want to obtain a Jam Copy license. How do I go about doing that?
Okay, so usually for the most part, Jam Copy is the initiator. We've had instances where persons reached out to us, recognizing, having heard about the need for a license, and decided that they ought to do the right thing. So you're talking institutionally now. We would contact you, or you can contact us and say in fact, we have had some institutions, as I said, who reached out to us, and they will reach out to us and say, we are an institution. Can't pick them up now because I don't remember the name, the proper name. It's an institution out in St. Anne. And Joan, if you're online, text me the name so I can pick them up. There's this nursing institution out in St. Anne, and they contacted us that they were a teaching institution and they understand that they needed a license, and so they were coming to us because they really wanted to follow the law, which was wonderful. And I pick them up, you know yourself. So we would then explain why it is necessary for a license, refer to the copyright law, what are the provisions, establishing jam copies legitimacy for getting these for issuing these licenses, and what already what it is that we do and why we do what we do within we get our legitimacy from the Jamaica Copyright Act as a licensing body, and we would enter into the discussions, find out more about what it is that you do, and guide you in terms of what the license requires. Now, there we have a schedule of fees depending on the sector that you are operating in, which would apply to you. And it's now a kind of a very simple, straightforward process. We send you the draft license because it's a standard license that everybody has. And the license can be viewed on our website. For example, there's a sample copy of the license, the tertiary license on our website. So the provisions are the same, and the license fee. So if you are a teacher's college, for example, all teachers' colleges would pay the same rate. If you're a university, you all pay the same rate. So, for example, UTech and UIT, the rates are the same. UTech and NCU would pay the same rate because they're on the same university level. So community colleges, for example, pay the same rate. So there's a different rate that applies to the sector in which you're operating, and that rate would apply to you. And so we would basically go to explaining why the license is necessary, go through the terms of the license with you. You get a copy of the draft license for review. If you have any questions, we follow up and go through that process, and then we send the license. There are some institutions, I have to say, that despite talking to them and showing to them, it takes a long time for them to get it and to buy into it and to say, okay, yes, and they're reluctant. They say, okay, I don't have any way out of it, and I know you don't really have a way out of it. So you need to take a license if you want to be on the right side of the law, and you need to do this because you see, and let me just add this here. There is a provision in the Copyright Act that speaks about copying 5% per quarter. And persons state that to me, okay, the law says I can copy 5% per quarter, so I don't need a license. But then we have to, let's say, read, continue reading. Don't just stop there. Go down, go to the next sentences below that. That says that essentially it says if there is a licensing body operating and if licenses are available, then you need to take that license. So that provision was in place before there were licensing bodies, and to give some protection to users and also to rights holders. So the users will know that they shouldn't copy more than this 5% per quarter. And rights holders would know that that's the amount that users can copy, so they still have their rights intact. But once a licensing body came into being and once licenses were available, then they had to avail themselves of those licenses. And so you can't escape behind the cloak of the 5% per quarter provision in the Copyright Act.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very important for us to point out to the general public the importance of obtaining those licenses. So I'm going to ask you again. I know you touched on it, but why would you say it's important for writers and illustrators to obtain a jam copy license?
Well, the writers and the illustrators are not the ones who are paying the license, right? So these are the users. The creators, the writers, and a whole range of creators are eligible to join Jam Copy. So what I usually say is anybody whose work is embodied in a printed publication. So if you are a writer, an illustrator, a photographer, in fact, it's interesting if you are, say, a potter or a ceramist, and you have done this beautiful piece of sculpture, and then Chantal goes, I'm the sculptor, yeah, you're right, I'm the sculptor, and in another life that is to come, I'm the sculptor, and Chantal takes this beautiful photograph of my piece of work, and then that photograph ends up in a publication that is done by an entity. Let's say, for example, the UWI Press. So I'm the sculptor. I've done this beautiful piece of sculpture. Chantal takes the photograph, and that photograph is used by UWI Press in a text. Now you have four persons, four entities involved, and all four are eligible to join Jam Copy. All four can mandate Jam Copy to act on their behalf because all four have rights in that textbook or in that novel or in that book that the UWI Press has now published. The UWI Press has rights as the publisher. The publisher got specific rights, has specific rights under the Jamaica Copyright Act for the layout, what the law refers to the typographical arrangement of the text. So UWI as the publisher, UWI Press as the publisher has copyright as a publisher. Chantal has rights as the photographer of the photograph. And I have some rights because it's my sculptor that started all of this in the first place. So all of us would then be entitled to join Jam Copy because if that publication is copied and the page, for example, which is copied is the page that contains the photograph of that sculpture, then all of us would benefit from that use of that piece of that work by that user. And so all persons are eligible to join Jam Copy. The users then on the other side are the ones who would take the license to be able to make these copies. And they pay a fee to Jam Copy, which is the bridge that joins rights holders on the one side and users on the other side. The Jam Copy becomes that bridge that joins both sides, and we all become one happy creative industry. And then, so the user would pay to Jam Copy the license fees, and then Jam Copy transmits royalties to the rights holders. All four of us would then benefit, or it's four or three of us. You, me, and UWI Press, and whoever wrote the book, and everybody else would then get benefit from those royalties.
Thank you for that very clear explanation of that. Right. So you were telling us about copying earlier. So can you speak more in terms of how much of a work a jam copy license allow you to copy?
Jam Copy's license. Okay, so the license allows you to make, for example, to copy a chapter or up to 20% or a chapter of a book, whichever is greater. And that is a specific provision in the license. It allows you to copy, for example, an entire journal article. If you don't, piece of a journal article can't help you. So you can copy the entire article. You can copy an entire article out of a newspaper. You can copy an entire poem. not the whole anthology, but you can copy the entire poem. So it depends on the kind of work. There are those specific provisions in the license. I'll point out though that whilst those are the general provisions in our licenses, so all our licenses are standard in that regard. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit last year, RROs throughout the world, as part of the IFRO network, in consideration of the pandemic, decided that what we would do is to expand temporarily those licensing limits. So in here in Jamaica, and different countries did different things. Jam Copy was one of those that we gave a wide expanse. We expanded the limits a little bit more than some countries did. So currently in Jamaica, you can copy up to 35%, up to 3 chapters. It's not one, you can copy up to 3 chapters of a book. And so, but that is a temporary limit that has been expanded for COVID. So we expanded it last year up to December, and we expanded it this year again up to, I think, the end of June, when the academic year kind of comes to a close. So institutions are able to take benefit, to take profit of that expanded limitations given the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier as well, the license is never to be seen as a replacement for buying the book, because the license is not supposed to prejudice the sales of the published editions. That is not the intention. The license is recognition of the need and the acknowledgement on the part of the rights holders of this public good. And sometimes you hear the conversations about what should happen in the public good and how much should be given, and all of, this is supposed to be the public good and all public good. Let me just say that the public good was taken into consideration when the Copyright Act was being drafted. So inherent in the Copyright Act is all the considerations about the public good. And the Copyright Act, the Jamaica Copyright Act, is one of the best pieces of legislation referred to, certainly in the region. I mean, I remember being at a copyright seminar in the Dominican Republic. Marcus was there too. And we were going through the Copyright Acts of the region. And several times the Jamaica Copyright Act was pointed to as the legislation in the region which has many of the things which some other ones don't have. So we have a good piece of legislation with us, and I will reiterate, into that legislation went a lot of consideration about the public good and what is in the public interest. So that is already taken care of. So when Jam Copy speaks about a license, we're speaking about the need for a license and the payment of fair remuneration to rights holders, because the public good argument and the public interest considerations have already been taken into account and is inherent in the Copyright Act. Just wanted to lay that out there.
Yes, and thank you so much for pointing that out and for making that clear to our participants this morning, how important it is, to think of the creators of the work, and also to point out how robust of provisions we have in our Caribbean. Sometimes in Jamaica, we don't appreciate, what we have. When we compare ourselves to other Caribbean countries, we recognize that our legislation, we really are doing well. I know there are always room for growth. But we also have to applaud ourselves for the work that we have done in Jamaica and continue to do, and also applaud Jam Copy for what they have been doing as well. I know that, as you mentioned earlier, that Jam Copy is a part of some international bodies. Can you tell our participants how important those international bodies are to us in Jamaica or to the members?
Well, absolutely. Even going back to when Jam Company was established, the International Federation, IFRO, was very instrumental in our being established. And that network was very, 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 very instrumental and supportive. I mean, this was something new that was being done, was novel, and we didn't have the information, we didn't have the expertise or the experience. And in our instance, the then it was called the Canadian Copyright Licensing Agency. Now it's called Access Copyright. They, of course, are a member of IFRO, and they were kind of designated by IFRO as the big sister for the Caribbean. And they were the ones who basically held our hands and set us up. They held the hands of the persons who were in the legal the IP unit at the time, and basically held their hands and held the hands of the publishing task force, the task force that was set up by through the BIAJ here, the Book Industry Association of Jamaica. Shirley Carvey was then the chair, was then the person who was asked by the BIAJ to lead the task force. And um, Can Copy, as it was then called, is it a Can Copy Jam Copy thing? That's where it came from. The Can Copy, as it then was called, was the big sister, and they helped. They provided funding for us, the initial funding to set us up, um, and that was how we came into being, and held our hands through the process, with developing our licenses, developing our structure, developing our policies, all of those. We got guidance. And so they were basically the leader. They were our mentor for several years until they said, well, y'all big enough now, y'all can manage on your own. Goodbye, kind of thing. Well, not quite like that. But they continue to help our hands, and they have been the mentor for the region. And then they passed the mantle on to Jam Copy, who is now now the mentor for the region. But through IFRO, we were able to get the support from other agencies, the CLA, the UK agency, the American agency, the Copyright Clearance Center. New Zealand has been very helpful to us. So this network, through IFRO, we support each other, we share data, we share information, um, and we share best practices. That's what we do in that network. IFRO also is a partner with WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And so they have a working agreement. And so IFRO is at the table for all the WIPO discussions relating to copyright and related rights. And through that, Jam Copy is at the table by extension with those discussions. So we find the network and say it's very, very important to be part of that network. It helps in terms of setting best practices, even in terms of how Jam Copy is supposed to operate. What are the best practices that we are supposed to employ? How are we supposed to treat with our rights holders? How are we supposed to treat with our how we relate to our licensees? Even how we relate to each other as RROs. All of that, those standards are set by the international body IFRO. And as I said, with relating through WIPO, we also have that as a next level of considerations and engagement and involvement.
Thank you for sharing that. So
I'll just
it's really
add,
important.
I'll just add as well that outside of IFRO and WIPO, There are also other international agencies. So, for example, there is the International Publishers Association, the IPA, which is the global body for publishing, and is also a partner with IFRO, a member of IFRO. And we also work very closely with the IPA. In fact, through our interventions, we now have a local arm of the IPA in Jamaica. The BIAJ is now a member of the IPA, and there's also the International Authors Forum, which is the equivalent for authors, which we also have a relationship with. And some person may remember we put on the an international publishing conference back in 2015. Um, the online mind conference, digital publishing conference, and the IPA was an integral part of that. The IFRO was an integral part of that. WIPO. So there is merit. We can't underscore too much the importance and relevance of these international organizations and the international connection with these agencies.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's always important to partner with other persons outside because you learn more from them and they assist. And so that partnership is always very important. And I see Miss Salome is putting something in the chat about congratulations on your negotiation and your successes so far. Yes, I'd like you to talk a little
Thank
bit
you,
more.
friend.
So, right. So last week we saw a beautiful article in the newspaper. Public schools allowed to copy license work. So tell us a little bit more about that. And if there's anyone who has a specific question for Miss Newman, I'm going to ask her to put in the chat so we can address them after she speaks about that article that was in the paper last.
Okay. We had an off-air conversation about that, right, Chantal? um, so the as I mentioned before, the the government of Jamaica was the first license signed back in 2001, and that license only referred to use of materials in government agencies and departments, and did not cover education, meaning it did not cover the copying that was done in the process of teaching and learning. And the cabinet decision back then was very specific that we should enter into a specific arrangement with the Minister of Education for that would relate to the copying that was done in education. And so the conversation with the Minister of Education started back in 2004. And we've been having those discussions since then. So think about every single Minister of Education that has passed through the Minister of Education since 2004. Started with it was then Honorable Maxine Henry Wilson. That was the first one. So think of every single minister from Senator Maxine Henry Wilson then up to now. Everyone Jam Copy has met with. Every single one. And it has been a long and tedious process. Sometimes, I mean, there have been hiatuses, and upon hiatuses, we're having a conversation and we think we're there, and then silence, and nothing happens for another 2 years despite our knocking on the door. So it's been a long, hard road. All the whiles pointing out that any copying that was being done in schools for teaching and learning was being done illegally. And publishers and creators alike have suffered at the hands of that, because we all know that the extensive copying that happens at the primary and secondary level institutions. We all know. I mean, I mean, from we going to school, for those persons who go to school and they know it happens, to the parents who have to who give money each month or each quarter to buy the paper, to the parents who are told to copy pages 20 to 50, and they copy it at work and carry it to give the teacher the 50 copies. We all know it happens. We all know it happens. It was no secret. And you know, persons who are anybody who would suggest it otherwise or being disingenuous, we all know it happened. And so we tried we had the conversation. We tried, and last September we quickly put it with the BIAJ on the desk of the new minister to say, this is a matter, as we have done every time, this is a matter that needs to be dealt with, and it is urgent, and even more so now in this pandemic, because we know that the copying, and I remember when I talk about copying, I'm talking about only photocopying. We're talking about copying generally. Even in this era of the pandemic, it was even more so. I got text messages on WhatsApp messages from friends who are teachers saying, Carol, there are these people in my WhatsApp group who putting whole PDF book in the group, and we tell them not do it, and them still do it. We don't know what else to do. We know say it's wrong, but them still do it. What can we do? I said, tell them, so the police are gonna lock them up. And we said, just remind them, and they remind. And in fact, I remember getting a WhatsApp message from somebody who said to me that these teachers in a particular group who are doing it have gone rogue, and they have just removed themselves from the group. So God knows what they, and form their own group. So God knows what they're doing in that group now. No, I'm telling you, there's some WhatsApp message that you just don't delete, and those are some I don't delete.
You still have the evidence.
I still have the evidence. I still have the book. I said, in fact, I said to someone, the person, send me the copies. Someone's whole science book, a whole science text, a whole English listen. So I know it was happening, and we kept saying it is happening, and it needs to be addressed. And we had, in fact, we had one. We partnered with JIPO for a webinar last year. That was one of the things that drove that, because I said, let us try to have a webinar with teachers. And one of my friends who was a teacher said, they're not going to come because they don't want to hear. And I reached out to the National Association of Teachers of English, who is represented on our board, because our board is not only made up of rights holders, but we have user reps on our board as well. So that's one user rep that is on our board. And we reached out to them and said, let's do a webinar. And we spoke with Jeff, and so that is how that webinar came about. So back in returning to the matter of the license, we put the matter on the desk of the Minister Favour Williams, and she committed to us and publicly that she was going to attend. She was going to give the matter her attention. And so we began to have those conversations, and we started the conversation. We contacted the minister in September. I think it was late September, and she committed to have done this by the end of the year. We didn't quite make the end of the year, but we have to acknowledge her role in this coming to fruition last week when we signed the license. So, as I said, it has been a long road, a hard road, but we now have a license, which is only a first step in the process. We now have a license for primary and secondary level public institutions, and it's still very new, of course. There's still a long way to go in terms of terms of just rolling that out and the mechanisms involved with that. So yeah, one step along the road to get in compliance. Something
Awesome,
to get
awesome.
compliant as something in our DNA, which is it's not there. It's not there. And it's going to be, I know, I mean, I've been around, I've been doing this for a long time, and so I have seen the progress. I have seen the progress. But we still have a long way to go in terms of compliance, and also in terms of rights holder education, just reminding rights holders the rights they have, and how it can be exploited and how they should manage it. For example, we have to keep reminding the rights holders that when you join Jam Copy, it's not the end all and be all to your troubles. When you sign a membership agreement with Jam Copy, it doesn't mean that you're going to sit down and fold your hands and say, I have mandated Jam Copy and therefore I need to do nothing else. You still have the responsibility as the rights holder to monitor the marketplace and see how your work is being used. It is still your responsibility. It's a private right. So, for example, Jam Copy can't go to court on your, can't initiate a suit on your behalf. It's still your private right. And so you have that responsibility as a rights holder to continue to watch, to monitor, to look, to see how your work is being used, and to note any infringement that is happening, and also take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that your works are being used in the right and proper way.
Excellent,
So
excellent.
again, thanks to Minister Favor Williams and the team from the Ministry of Education in us reaching this milestone.
Excellent. Also want to point out, the importance of, intellectual property and persons knowing how much it is valuable. I think many persons don't recognize how valuable intellectual property is. And as you mentioned earlier, that persons were reaching out to you, teachers are reaching out to you. We had the same thing happening here at JIPO. Many teachers were reaching out. We've been doing sessions, one-on-one session with some teachers just to explain to them, certain the Copyright Act and the rules that govern, copywriting. So a number of persons have been reaching out, and I'm very happy for that because it shows that they want to do the right thing. And so that is something that I am happy for at JIPO. We're happy for that we're actually getting persons, calling us persons who want to do presentations just to speak on copyright because they want to comply. And I like the fact that we are creating an environment, an atmosphere where persons recognize and are recognizing the benefit and the importance of being creative, and also to appreciate and to use persons' work in the right way. Right? I see some questions in the chat. One participant said a very detailed and excellent presentation, and they'd like me to ask you to expand on the process of copyright holders joining the collective society in order to safeguard your works.
Okay, so as I mentioned, copyright owners, the copyright holders who can join, anybody whose work appears in a printed publication, whether it's a book, a magazine, a journal, newspaper. If your work appears in those kind of publications, then you can be eligible for joining Jam Copy. The requirement is to have had one piece of work published in printed form. So if all of your works are born digital, if all of your works appear only in digital form, whilst you can register with Jam Copy, we're not able to license your work at this time. And so we encourage persons whose work only appears in digital form to just hold off and wait for the announcement when we tell you we can now license your work, your digital work, so you can now join. So as of now, your work has to appear in printed form. So if your work appears in both print and digital, that's fine. But so one piece of work in digital form is a requirement, and the works that we now license are works of this printed works. So the process is there are on our website forms. Several forms are on our website. So for example, the affiliation agreement for creators is different from the affiliation agreement for publishers. And you hear me saying affiliation, it is equivalent to what in some age like in JCAT they call them members. We call them affiliates because of how our system is, our structure is set up. So you become an affiliated rights holder. And so there are the agreements on our website. You can download them. They are fillable. They're PDF fillable, so you can fill them in. And right now, because of the pandemic, we usually are very strict and very specific that we must get the form back with your your signature, original signature. It's a legal document, so photocopies and scanning doesn't really work right now for legal purposes. But because of the pandemic, what we have been saying to persons who been in terms of persons who want to join, you can download the form, complete it. You can email the form back to us, and then you mail the signed copy later on, or drop it off. We have a drop box at the office. You can in the foyer at the office. You can drop it there. But if you complete the form and email it to us, we will accept that, and the date you send it in, if when you're being when you're being given affiliation, when that is being finalized, your date of affiliation will become the date that you submitted the form by email, until you're able to get the signed copy to us, because we still kind of restrict the numbers of persons who come to the office physically, and we encourage persons that they can drop the forms in the drop box in the lobby at the office. So you complete the form, and there's a section of the form that requires you to list your works. It's very important that you complete every single detail. We need to know the title of the publication. We need to know when it was, the year it was published, the publisher, the ISBN, the title of the work. If it is that you're not the only author, if both if the book was authored by Chantal and myself, I need to be very specific that there are two authors, Chantal and myself. If I'm the person who is applying, I'm applying for myself, but I list on the form that the book is written by Chantal and I. Chantal has to come and sign up on her own, but we need to know so that when we are searching, because there's a process of verification, and that process of verification may throw up that the book is, it will not may, it will throw up that the book was authored by two persons. So we need to be sure that it is the same title that you are talking about that we are seeing when we are doing our checks. That is very important. If what we get a lot of as well is persons may have written just a chapter of a book. They contributed one chapter to a book, but they send us the name of the book, and they send us everything else and their name. And then we are searching for this book, and it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. And every time we see the book, my name is not showing as the author at all. It's Chantal's name we see. But how are we going to know that I have contributed a chapter to the book? So you have to be very specific with the information. If you've only contributed a chapter, you need to say you've contributed a chapter. You've contributed chapter 10, titled so and so, on page so and so of the publication, titled so and so, edited by so and so. So all the information, because when we're doing the searches to verify the publication for our database, we need to be very specific that we are the same title you're talking about, the same one we're talking about. We have that challenge also with anthologies. So you have written one poem, and you have one poem in an anthology of 50 poems, and you give us the name of the anthology and the ISBN and everything. But we can't. There's no association in the cataloging about you being the author of a poem. So you have to be very specific. You are the author of The Beautiful Day, which is on page 60 of the anthology entitled so and so, published by so and so in so and so. So we need specific information. The same thing with journals. We need to be very, very specific about that. And we need samples of work. So if you, for example, are an illustrator, we need sample copies of the work that you have done. So we need a page out of the book where you have illustrated. Because of course, when you search in the various databases, whether it's a Library of Congress database, a World Catalog, we won't find any reference to you as an illustrator necessarily in the book. But we need to know that you, in fact, are the illustrator for this work, and that, in more importantly, the work has been published. So we need to verify every single title that set comes into us, and so we ask for sample works for some pieces of work in order to be able to verify those works. So you complete the form. It tells you which works we need sample copies of, and you send in the form with the sample copies. Drop those in the box in the lobby of the office, and we do the verification process and inform you when it is completed that you're now affiliated with Jam Copy, and we give you your affiliation number.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very comprehensive. There is also some follow-up questions. The same person is asking if someone has an article in a book of compiled articles, should they also register with Glam Copy? And I think you also addressed that. So the
Right.
answer is yes. And also, as I peruse the chat, just want to point out that copyright protection is automatic, so it arises upon the creation of a work. So once your work is in a tangible format, you receive automatic protection. And this is stemmed from the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Work. All right, so please remember and bear that in mind. There's another question. Can you speak to the issue of photocopying as a necessity when embrittled items can no longer be used without risking damage? So that's one
Okay.
part of the question. And another part, also, I came across an issue of copying of legal limits on human rights grounds in some countries. Was there any such request made to jam copy during the height of the pandemic?
And I've also addressed that. So during the pandemic, as I mentioned, we have increased the limit, the copying limits on the basis of the pandemic. So we have expanded that to our licensees. So if you're a licensed user, you have a license from Jam Copy, you have a blanket license, so you don't need to come back to us every time. If you have a blanket license, then you would have gotten an advisory from Jam Copy that the licensing limits have been expanded. I also did speak to those copies. If you have a copy in your library which is tattered and torn, and you need to make a substitute copy, a replacement copy, then you can, under the license, be allowed to do that. You just need to let us know that you're doing it, so that when we see it, we know. And if and of course, so that, for example, the rights holder, as I say, remember that I said the rights holder is supposed to be monitoring the marketplace. So the rights holder may come and see you with a completely copied version of their book. They would know that you have gone so under license by Jam Copy. And that copying, as I said, it could be that what you do is that you scan it. If you can deal with the light of scanning, you may scan it, or you may be able to photocopy, but you are allowed to make, under the license, a replacement copy.
All right, thank you so much for that. We're winding down nicely, so I'm going to just ask you to give your final comments now, Ms. Newman. Anything that you think that you want to leave with our audience today?
Um, I would just want to reiterate to firstly to rights holders that you are very important. You are, I mean, really and truly, it's all about you. Because if you don't create the work, we don't have works to enjoy. It's all about you, because the creators it is who are who are the ones who are securing, are the custodians of our culture, of our heritage. I mean, they are the ones who do the recording and the writing of our stories. And so it's important for you to understand your importance in that regard, and to understand the rights that you have been given by the Copyright Act, and take the time to learn and to know what it is that you are given, this awesome responsibility that you have, and how you can exploit these rights that you have been given. It has I remember a former DG Idris saying that it's really the route to economic development for nations. And he will always touted that. So we need to, as rights holders, remember that. A message to our policymakers: remember that the importance of our creatives, the importance of our writers and our publishers. They are the ones who are writing our stories, and they need to be encouraged. Our indigenous publishing industry is critical. Nobody can write about us as we can. We need to see, our founding chair and publisher, Shirley Carby, is very passionate about this. She talks about the importance. She always talks about the importance of seeing ourselves in our books, to seeing ourselves in our stories. I remember my children the first time they met Judith Falloon Reed, a writer, and how excited they were about the fact that they were meeting the person who wrote the book. I myself, one of my favorite books in high school was Escape the Last Man Speak. And I remember how I went on and on and on when I met Jean DaCosta. I mean, because you're far removed from these people and you see these books and you don't know until you really meet the person face to face and you're able to relate at that level. So please, we need to ensure that the due respect and honor is given to our indigenous publishing industry, and we do everything as policyholders, as policymakers, to encourage and stimulate that indigenous publishing industry. And to our users, if we don't have the industry, we don't have the stories, we don't have the work. So we need to provide and provide the remuneration to our creators to be able for them to be able to continue to write our stories, to record our history, so that we can have it for cultural prosperity.
Thank you so much. Such wonderful final words. Certainly appreciate those, and also want to extend an invitation to participants online, those who are creators, creatives, that we have the voluntary registration of copyright and related rights at JIPO. So we ask you to, we invite you to also contact us to deposit your work with us. Very, very important as well, in connection with contacting Jam Copy to deposit, to also become a member of Jam Copy. Right, so we are so happy this morning that you are able to join us, Miss Newman, and we look forward to more conversation around this topic. And as you are the last CMO in this series, we want to say a special thank you for joining us this morning. So on behalf of our Executive Director, Ms. Liker Bellamy, and the staff of JIPO, we say thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we hope the participants that you've learned a lot from this conversation. And we have a poll that is up now, so we invite you to also complete this poll for us. It's very important for us to get your feedback so we know how best we can improve on our webinars. And as I mentioned, our next webinar will be on May 20th, 2021 at 9 a.m. and the focus will be innovation and economic resilience, opportunities for Jamaica. And so we invite all the participants to join us again on May 20th, 2021 at 9 a.m. for this very exciting webinar that we'll be having on innovation and economic resilience, opportunities for Jamaica. If it is that you want further information, you can always visit our website at www.jipo.gov.jm, or you can check out all our social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter for more information. And as Ms. Newman said earlier, if
I just add our website information,
right,
jamcopy.com as well.
right.
And jamcopy.com, there are some links as well to WIPO, to IFRO, to other CMOs as well.
Okay, awesome. So there we have it, participants. We're streaming live from JIPO Studios, and again, we say thank you so much, Ms. Newman, for joining us this morning on this exciting presentation regarding our collective management organization. So thank you, everyone, and see you on May 20th at 9 a.m. for another exciting webinar. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
It was my pleasure.